Hello folks, it's Carl here from Carl's Adventures, and today I went to WWT Welney to look at the Hooper and Bewick swans. All I can say, it was a very good day out. This is my outro really, because what I didn't show you is I took this with me. I don't know if you can see that. US Army MRE ration pack as my lunch, and all I can say is it was a very nice meal and quite unusual in places. I can say one of the things I weren't expecting was Smarties in with nuts and raisins. But obviously that's the nature of the US forces role. Out in the field they need as much calories as they can. Anyway, this is me. Oh, incoming.
Press it when they fly. Flying formation.
Coastal, on estuaries, so yeah, lots of different wetland habitats, and we have our wetlands here on the used washes. So we've got a 3-mile section of used washes that we own and manage, which is basically, if you look at the right hand end of the hive, you've got all those gorgeous reeds out there. If you look further on, you'll see a pylon line that cuts across the washes. That's our northern extent of the lands that we own and manage. All the way down past us, to the left hand side, you can see a smaller line of wires that cut across the washes. Beyond that, that's actually our summer walk, which is open later on in the year. Beyond that is the Welney Wash Road, and most of the washes between those two landmarks we own and manage. The used washes is 22 miles long though, so we don't own and manage all of the used washes. The RSPB and local wildlife trust, they own and manage the extent of the used washes beyond the Welney Wash Road, and we work together to monitor the birds in the winter time to understand how important this site is for wintering wildfowl, for the birds that come to the UK in the winter time, and then we're both managing our own site but very much working together for the benefit of wading birds that are here in the spring and summer breeding, and all of the wetland wildlife that we are home to. So the plants, the diversity of plants out there, insects as well. And if you haven't been at different times of the year, I would implore you to come back and see what we're all about in the different seasons, because it is very different out here each season. We're right in the middle of our winter spectacle at the moment, with lots of birds about using used washes, and we've actually got quite low water levels for this time of year. We haven't had any considerable rainfall since Christmas and New Year, when our water levels were much higher, and this is actually quite low for this point in the winter time. If you want to have a look at the used washes and what it looks like in the surrounding landscape, we actually have a map in the middle section of the floor of this central part of the hive, and this kind of runway strip of 2 lines that cut through the middle of this aerial map is the used washes. So that's the 22-mile strip from the sluice gates in the south at Erith, where the water comes on from the River Ouse, all the way up to Welney Sluice and then Denver, which is just south of Downham Market. So we're sitting on the River Ouse here, and this habitat is actually man-made. So the drains, those straight channels that cut the water out of the River Ouse and onto the used washes, were man-made several hundred years ago by prisoners of war to actually drain the surrounding area so that access could be gained to the really rich peaty soils and the resources that this area really had in abundance at that time. So, you know, living off the land, using the plants and the wildlife to make your living. So that would have been us historically. Nowadays, we've only got these little scraps of wetlands that are left, the used washes being one, not, you know, a few other sites dotted around, and that's really where you get sort of the biggest numbers of wildlife, particularly birds at this time of year, that are coming back to these areas to either roost on overnight like the swans do, or graze on it, or feed on the mud flats and the spits and islands that are out there. So it really is very important for our wildlife, and obviously that's really beneficial for us as well, to be able to enjoy our wetlands and our wetland wildlife. We have also got 300 acres next to the visitor centre, so when you came to the visitor centre you were looking out the window and overlooking Lady Fen, which was arable farmland that we've turned back into wetlands habitat. So that's in addition to the 1,000 acres that we have out here, and that isn't in the same system, so it doesn't suffer from the same amounts of flooding when we get high water levels out here on the used washes, particularly in breeding season, which is very detrimental to the birds. We have a lot of brown-nesting waders that are using the reserve at that time of year, and flooding in the spring and summer can be completely writing off their breeding season. So having that land outside of the used washes is a safety net, but ideally we want good conditions on the used washes, so we've got as much wetland habitat to provide for the birds as possible. I'm just going to pick out a few of our winter highlights now that won't come up for the feeding just before Jeff goes outside and feeds the birds. So we've got some unusual winter visitors with us at the minute, which are the geese that are on that right-hand island, so the finger of land that goes away from us. The geese that are on the left-hand sort of shore are bean geese. They've come over for the winter time, and they are quite unusual. So here, we traditionally don't get masses of flocks of geese. Normally you'll see greylag and you'll see Canada here. So bean geese are more unusual. We don't get the numbers of geese like they do up on the Norfolk coast, so pink-footed geese, you know, red geese, it might see up there. We don't tend to get down here. So that's quite nice for us at the moment. We really specialise in the swans, so we've got the 3 species of swan that I'll talk about when Jeff goes out to feed. Some of the other species that don't come right up close to the hive include widgeons. So there's, again on that island, if you come towards the front of the island, so this near end, you've got some potsherds sitting there, which are the silvery ducks with a red head. You've also got a few widgeons feeding on the grasses. So look out for birds that have got a chestnut head with a golden blaze on the forehead, and if they're grazing away, there's a good chance you're looking at widgeon. They are the most numerous ducks that we get on the used washes in the winter. We're incredibly important for them as an overwintering site. They're here grazing the grasses before they start to go back to their breeding grounds for the spring and the summer. We've also definitely got at least one pintail on that island, so the duck with a very white front, it's probably still got its head under its wing. But if it popped its head out, you would see a nice chocolate brown head with a white line that starts from where you'd imagine its ears to be, down to that white front. And if you can see the bottom end of the duck, you'll see that it's got a lovely long tail. So the males have that really long tail feather, which is where they get their name from. There's also at least one shoveler sat on the island there. So you've got a duck which is white with a sort of chestnut panel along the side. And when they're not sat on the island roosting, when they're on the water or preening, you'll see they've got a lovely green head with a golden eye, and they've got a really large bill, so a really flattened out large bill, which is where they get their name from. So they kind of use that to filter feed in the water. So that's a couple of our different species of ducks that we get here. If you're completely new to ducks, that's going to potentially increase your species list no end, because we do get a good range of wintering ducks here at Welney. There are also some flocks of wading birds about, so if you took a walk down to Reed Veg Hive, we've got some good numbers of black-tailed godwit about on the reserve at the moment. They're Icelandic black-tailed godwits that are spending their winter here. In the spring and summer, they'll be getting ready to go on migration further north, and we welcome back our breeding black-tailed godwits that have spent their winter in Africa, and they are much rarer, so much fewer in number. The ooze washers and the neem washers are the key breeding sites for these birds. And we've been doing a lot of work in recent years as part of Project Godwit to work with the RSPB to help this bird in particular to boost its numbers through some really inventive conservation techniques using our skills that we have within the organisation, whilst we are also trying to protect their wetland homes for their breeding season. So we've got large flocks of black-tailed godwit. You might well see lapwing as well, from some of the other hives, because, like I say, the water level is quite low. Have a good scan amongst all that vegetation and look out for snipe, redshank, dunlin, what else? We've also had ruff about recently as well, and golden plover in good numbers. You might well get them on the farmer's fields and on the reserve as well. So if Jeff's happy to go out and start whistling to the birds, he'll pick up the wheelbarrow and he will appear from the right-hand corner, down on that ledge there. He'll do a bit of feeding in front of the north wing hive, and then he'll be making his way from the right-hand end all the way along the front and off past the south wing hive. So no matter where you are in the hive, you will see the feeding, and the birds generally tend to follow along with the feeder. So you'll see the cocktail ducks will get the idea when they start hearing the whistle, they'll sort of draw down to the front here. So Newt Washers and Welney is one of the best places in the country to see all three species of swan that we get here in the UK. We've got mute swan out here, so we've got the ones with the orange bills and that sort of fleshy black blob on the top of the bill, which is called a caruncle. These swans are UK residents, so they're here all year round. You'll see them at other areas, you'll see them on rivers, you'll see them on lakes and reservoirs as well. These guys will go off in the summertime and they will find a nice looking ditch and they'll build their nests, they'll lay their eggs and hatch their young here. And there is a family of mute swans that's been along our header drain, so the drain that's along the footpath, so there's a family of certainly 3 cygnets along there. I've just had a quick peek and see if they're out front here. No, they haven't cottoned on to the fact that they're feeding. So they're very dark in colour, so mute swan cygnets are like a chocolatey brown, steely grey colour. They've got a solid dark bill, and as they mature they become white in the plumage and they get that orange bill like the adult birds. So you will still see swans all year round here. We have mute swans, we do have some resident hooper swans as well, I'll talk about them in a bit. But we have hooper and Bewick swans that predominantly come and visit us at this time of year. So they're migrating here for winter. We've got hooper swans here in front of us. So the swans that have got the yellow and black bill, not the orange bill, are the winter migrants that are coming here to escape colder countries. Hooper swans have come down from Iceland. So they've travelled 1,200 miles to get here to the ooze washes. And they actually do the largest feed crossing of any swan species. So from Iceland down to the islands that are off the coast of Scotland is a really big undertaking for these birds. And not just the adults, but their young that they've had over the summer. So we see lots of families of hooper swans coming down here for winter. Again, the young Cooper swans are not white like the adults, so they're like a silvery grey plumage. They're a bit lighter than those mute swan cygnets. They've got the bill pattern already, so they've got that wider sort of base to the bill, which in the young is either yellow or sometimes a pinky colour. They've got the black tip to the bill, but they haven't got the yellow section just yet. So that's your Cooper swan adult and cygnets, and Cooper swans are doing really well. So you might have seen some of our swans featured on Winter Watch last night. So Chris Packham came out a couple of weeks ago and spent a day here on the Ouse Washes looking at the swans, getting the best out of our winter spectacle here. And as you might have heard on there, we recently had record numbers of Hooper swans. We had 12,500 Hooper swans on the Ouse Washes in our December count, which is a record for the Ouse Washes. And the reason for that is that they are managing to avoid lots of the threats that there are facing swans, and they're also having really good breeding seasons. So we see broods of anywhere from 1 or 2 cygnets up to 4, 5, 6, 7 is not even an unusual number for Hooper swans. They're long-lived birds, so they can get, over 20 years old if they manage to avoid all the threats that face them. So yeah, they are doing really, really well, and it's always lovely to see the first birds coming back here for the winter time. Now that the day length is getting longer, and particularly if you get a lovely day like today, you'll see lots of the birds, not just swans but the ducks as well. The males displaying to the females and getting the idea that spring is just around the corner. So we see that with the swans as well. Our Hooper swans, some of them can stay with us into March and April, so if they're non-breeders or if we get another cold snap, that might encourage birds to stay here a little bit longer. So we've got them for a few weeks yet, but some of them might well be thinking about getting into condition for that journey back up north. The third species of swan that we get on the Ouse Washes is the Bewick swan. So that's similar to the Hooper, they've still got yellow and black on the bill, and they're a lot smaller than the Hooper swan, so about a third smaller. They come across from Arctic Russia, so slightly different migration, but a longer migration, 2,500 miles across from Arctic Russia down here to the UK, and we are seeing fewer and fewer Bewick swans on the Ouse Washes each year. So again, if you listen to that Winter Watch piece last night, and you'll know that a few years ago we were seeing into the thousands of Bewick swans here in the winter. This winter we haven't even got all 500 this month, which is our peak month for Bewick swans. So they're a lot harder to see. They do tend to be a lot shyer. They don't tend to sort of come into the main lagoon for this feeding each day. They tend to keep away from the Hooper swans for roosting. What I would suggest if you really want to see a Bewick swan today is to take a walk down to Lyle or Friendside and have a look out across those washes and scan all the swans out there, because we have been having some Bewick swans. Now that the water levels are dropping, they're feeding on those washes a little bit more than they were when the water level was high. So that's probably going to be your best chance, unless you're going out into the fields to scan the flocks to spot them. So they have less yellow on the bill than the Hooper swans. They just have a little yellow blob and a lot more black about the bill. So if you see a swan with a predominantly black bill, give it a good second look and just check over like the size of the bird, and you could well be looking at a Bewick swan. Now the reason that we're seeing fewer Bewick swans back here is twofold. So they are declining as a population. They come through a lot more countries than the Hooper swans do, so it takes a lot more effort to get people along the whole flyway to think about the things that these swans are facing as threats and to act on them, to reduce the human impact on these swans. So a couple of the things that unfortunately they fall foul of is illegal shooting, so they are protected across the whole of their flyway. WWT has been working internationally across the whole of the flyway to raise awareness of this and to encourage the protection of Bewick swans. They've also fallen foul of ingesting lead shot. So lead, unfortunately, has been used over wetlands historically and the land that they go out into and feed during the day. So at the minute you might think, well, where are all these swans? Well, they roost on the washes at night, and then they go out into the fields during the day to feed. So on things like chickpea tops, rotten potatoes, spilt grain, so maize or wheat that's left in the fields, and then they come back onto the washes at dusk, and they're back here to roost for the night, so using the wetlands and the surrounding land. And what you'll see when they're feeding, when Jeff's feeding them, they haven't got teeth in their bills, They're picking up the grain and they're taking it down, and they will also pick up stones and bricks to grind up their food. And they wouldn't know the difference between something that is benign, like a bit of stone, and a more sinister material like lead. So unfortunately that's something historically that we've found. Sorry, I've just got a bit of a dry throat now. Which is probably like my cue to start wrapping up. So they also unfortunately fly into overhead structures. So when they're roosting on the washes and flying out to roost sites, doing it at dawn and dusk, and they're doing it at quite a low altitude, so they're not flying as high as they would on migration, and they can quite easily collide with things that are not very obvious for them. So in this area we work with UK power networks to advise them of the areas that these birds are using each winter, key flight routes, key areas where wires could really benefit from diverters. So I'm just holding up in the central bit of the hive one of these diverters. You might well have seen them on the wires. So the power company fits them, and this little panel at the bottom has a reflective section on it that spins in the wind, and that just helps make that obstacle a bit more obvious to the bird. So we meet up with them each winter to tell them, you know, where we think they ought to be fitted. The other thing that is meaning that we see fewer Bewick swans across here on the used washes is that they're also short sighted. So as we see warmer winters, they aren't needing to come all the way across here to the UK to escape cold countries. So, you know, areas where the water's going to freeze or snow's going to prevent them from feeding. So they're actually stopping in countries like Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands in higher numbers than they have done historically. So we're seeing fewer and fewer Bewick swans across here. This winter it looks like they might have had a good breeding season, but unfortunately in recent years that hasn't been the case. So our Bewick swans really need us to be protecting the wetlands that they use along their way, free from disturbance, free from pollution, and to really think about the things that we are putting in their way that is meaning that there's unnecessary deaths of swans across the whole of their flyway. And the things that we can do to remove these threats also have benefits for the other species that use wetlands as well. So, as you would have seen feeding when Jeff was out there, the pochard, the little ducks with the silverbacks and redheads, they also come across from Arctic Russia, and pochard are another species which are in decline. So another species that we're quite concerned about and are, you know, monitoring and looking at the threats that face these birds. So we're quite lucky here. We're one of the best places in the UK to see pochard this close in this number. So really to enjoy these birds and watch them diving under the surface of the grain. So they're one of our diving ducks here. And you might have seen there was at least one tufted duck before the feed. So if you see any that are a boldly coloured black and white duck in amongst with the pochard, that's one of our tufted ducks. So hopefully that's given you a really nice introduction to winter here at Welney, what we're all about. We really rely on the support of our visitors and our members. So if you